Dust swirled in thick clouds under the blaring final horn, the air heavy with the scent of sweat, leather, and churned-up dirt. Orson Ratskull Blightmoor lay sprawled in the middle of the arena, his face twisted in pain, his left leg bent at an angle no man's body should endure. The leather of his protective vest was scuffed and streaked with grime, the fresh marks of a brutal ride. His hat was gone, his helmet had rolled yards away, and all around him the noise of the crowd seemed to fade into an eerie, suffocating hush. Not 20 feet away, the monster still roamed. Gorefang Hollowspawn, nearly a ton of muscle, rage, and raw instinct, paced slowly, his broad head swaying side to side. Steam shot from his flared nostrils, curling in the cool night air. His black eyes locked on Orson, unblinking, and the arena seemed to shrink under the weight of that gaze. The beast's hooves bit into the dirt with every step, a slow, deliberate rhythm that made the crowd's collective heartbeat quicken. From the edge of the ring, Jareth Bonehowl Crowbane was already sprinting, boots pounding against the packed earth. His voice rang out, hoarse and urgent, shouting Orson's name. Behind him, Harlan Buzzard's Fang Vexthorn broke into a dead run, his bright vest flashing under the arena lights, while Malachi Dirtblood Scarn pushed through the gate with his battered medical kit slamming against his leg. They all knew it. They had seconds, maybe less, before Gorefang decided what came next. Orson tried to move, bracing his weight on his elbows to drag himself backward, but agony tore through his leg like fire. His breath came in sharp, uneven bursts. He could feel a pounding in his chest, every thud of his heart loud in his ears. Temperance, Vulture Eye, Draymond, watching from the stands, gripped the metal rail so tightly her knuckles went white. She couldn't move, couldn't scream. She could only watch as the animal she feared most in the world stalked the man she loved. The bull slowed, lowering his massive head until the curved tips of his horns pointed straight at Orson's chest. The crowd tensed, frozen in collective silence. Some covered their mouths. Others stood halfway out of their seats, powerless but unable to look away. Even Ophelia Widowbrand Cray, crouched near the photographer's pit with her camera, felt her hands hesitate over the shutter. The air itself seemed to stop moving. Then Gorefang took a single, decisive step toward Orson. The dirt shifted under his weight, and his muscles rippled like coiled cables. And in that moment, just as the crowd braced for the worst, the bull did something no one could have imagined, something that would halt the rodeo in its tracks and be remembered for years to come. The arena held its breath as Gorefang Hollowspawn stopped just inches from Orson Ratskull Blightmoor's boots. The bull's sides heaved with each breath, his nostrils flaring, but instead of lunging, he simply stood there, looming. Then, with a slow, almost deliberate movement, he turned his head, not toward Orson, but toward the incoming rescuers. Jareth Bonehowl Crowbane skidded to a halt, unsure if he'd just been spared or targeted. Harlan Buzzard's Fang Vexthorn circled wide, trying to draw the animal's focus away, his hands waving in broad arcs. Something about the bull's stillness was more unnerving than his rage. Malachi Dirtblood Scarn dropped too, one knee beside Orson, his eyes darting between the injury and the massive shadow that still hovered close. "Don't move, Ratskull," Malachi muttered, his voice low but firm. "That leg's gone bad. We need to get you out of here." Orson gritted his teeth, not from the pain alone, but from the humiliation of being flat on the dirt in front of thousands. Every instinct in him screamed to stand, to walk out under his own power. But the searing heat in his leg made that thought impossible. High above, Temperance Vulture Eye. Drummond's heart pounded so violently, she thought, she might pass out. She'd seen her husband injured before, but never like this. Never with that monstrous animal hovering over him like a sentinel. She glanced around, noticing Ezekiel Grevea Mornick leaning against a post by the far gate, arms crossed. A faint smirk on his face. He wasn't moving to help. In fact, his eyes seemed to glimmer with something darker than indifference, satisfaction. From the edge of the arena, Rick Dawson's voice thundered over the loudspeaker, calling for calm and ordering the gates opened. But Gorefang didn't move toward the exit. Instead, he shifted closer to Orson, lowering his head until his breath hit Orson's boots in hot, rhythmic bursts. The crowd murmured nervously, unsure if they were witnessing an act of strange restraint or the calm before a storm. Ophelia. Widow Brand, Cray's camera clicked rapidly, capturing every second. A journalist's instincts sensing a story far beyond a simple rodeo accident. Harlan made his move, stepping into Gorefang's peripheral vision and slapping his gloves together loudly. The bull's ears flicked back, and for the first time, he stepped away from Orson, though his gaze never left him. Jareth and Malachi seized the moment, hauling Orson onto a stretcher. Pain lanced through his body, his jaw tightening against the urge to shout. Every bump, every jolt of movement was a reminder that this wasn't over. Not for his leg, not for his pride, and not for whatever strange connection had just occurred between him and that beast dog as the stretcher was carried. Toward the gate, Orson craned his neck, locking eyes with Gorefang one last time. The bull stood perfectly still, watching him leave. It wasn't hatred Orson saw in those black eyes. It was something else entirely. And deep down, he knew it was only the beginning. The medic's tent buzzed with low, urgent voices. Malachi Dirtblood Scarn crouched beside Orson Ratskull. Blightmoor's caught, his hands pressing firmly against the splint to keep the leg steady. "Fracture's clean, but it's bad," he said, his tone clipped. "You're done for the season, maybe longer." Orson's jaw tightened, not just from the pain, but from the words. For a man like him, being benched was worse than any break. Temperance. Vulture Eye. Draymond stood near the entrance, arms wrapped tightly across her chest. "He needs more than a season," she snapped, glaring at Malachi. "He needs to stop before that animal kills him." Her voice wavered, betraying fear she couldn't hide. Orson met her eyes briefly, but neither spoke further. Too many emotions sat between them: love, pride, stubbornness, all waiting to erupt. Jare to Bonehowl Crowbane pushed into the tent. Dirt streaked across his face, still breathing hard from the chaos. "That wasn't normal, Orson," he said, dropping onto a folding chair. "Gorefang could have gored you 6 times over. But he didn't. He just stood there." His voice carried both confusion and unease, as though speaking the thought. Out loud made it even stranger. Outside, the muffled roar of the crowd carried on. The rodeo had resumed, but the atmosphere was different, quieter, unsettled. In the shadows near the gate, Ezekiel Gravia Mornick lingered, watching the tent from afar. His smirk had faded, replaced by something calculating. He had known Orson for years, their rivalry born in the dirt of countless arenas, but tonight had given him an idea. If Gorefang's strange behavior became a story, maybe he could use it. Maybe he could turn it against Orson. Ophelia Widowbrand Cray slipped inside, camera slung over her shoulder, her notepad already open. "I need your statement, Ratskull," she said, clicking her pen. "People want to know why the meanest bull in the circuit didn't finish you off." Orson shifted uncomfortably. He didn't have an answer, not one that made sense, anyway. He remembered the bull's eyes, dark, unblinking, almost human in the way they held him. He could still feel the heat of its breath, the strange stillness. That had passed between them. And for reasons he couldn't explain, it unsettled him more than the injury. Temperance stepped forward, placing herself between Ophelia and the cot. "He's not answering any questions tonight." Her tone was final, but Orson could see in her eyes that she wanted answers too. As Ophelia turned to leave, Orson leaned back against the cot, the pain in his leg pulsing like a heartbeat. Somewhere, Out in the arena, Gorefang Hollowspawn was still pacing behind the gates, and Orson couldn't shake the feeling that the animal was waiting for him. The night air outside the medic's tent was cool and sharp, carrying the smell of dust and diesel from the generators. Jareth Bonehowl Crowbane walked alongside. Temperance Vulture Eye, Draymond toward the parking lot, both speaking in low voices. "You know he's not going to sit this out," Jareth said, shaking his head. "Ratskull's got more grit than sense. But something about that bull. I've been riding 20 years, and I've never seen anything like it." Temperance's jaw tightened. "Neither have I, and that's exactly what scares me." Inside the arena, Gorefang Hollowspawn stood in his holding pen, snorting against the steel bars. His massive body shifted restlessly. The ground beneath him churned into deep grooves. Harlan Buzzard's Fang Vexthorn, leaning on the gate, watched him with narrowed eyes. "That ain't just an animal," he muttered under his breath. "That's a storm waiting for the right wind." He glanced over his shoulder and saw Ezekiel Gravia Mornick approaching, boots crunching. In the dirt, Ezekiel stopped beside the pen, studying Gorefang with the calm of a man sizing up an opponent. "I'll ride him next," Ezekiel said, almost casually. Harlan frowned. "You sure about that? He's not like the others." Ezekiel's lips curved into a cold half-smile. "That's exactly why." Without waiting for a reply, he turned and walked away, his long shadow stretching across the arena floor, back in the tent. Malachi Dirtblood Skarn was finishing a final check on Orson Ratskull Blightmoor's splint. "Stay off it, and maybe you'll walk straight again," Malachi grunted. Orson barely heard him. His mind kept replaying the moment in the dirt, the way Gorefang had looked at him. It hadn't been rage. It hadn't been mercy either. It was something else, something that felt like recognition. And that thought unsettled him more than the pain. Ophelia Widowbrand Cray reappeared at the tent flap, catching Orson's eye. "You sure you don't want to talk?" she asked, quietly. "I've covered wrecks, fights, even stampedes. But what happened out there tonight was different. People will want an explanation." Orson didn't answer, but his silence said enough. She scribbled a note in her pad before stepping back into the shadows, her mind already spinning with possibilities. The crowd's cheers rose for the next ride. Orson leaned back and closed his eyes. He could picture Gorefang's eyes even now. Black, deep, and steady. Somewhere deep in his gut, he knew this wasn't over. And if Ezekiel truly planned to climb onto that bull's back, the night was going to end in blood. Whether it would be the riders or the beasts, that was the only question. The arena lights blazed brighter as the announcer's voice thundered over the loudspeakers, introducing the next rider, Ezekiel Gravia Mornick, taking on Gorefang Hollowspawn. The crowd roared, the sound a mix of excitement and disbelief. In the medic's tent, Orson Ratskull Blightmoor's eyes snapped open. Pain or no pain, he tried to push himself upright, but Malachi Dirtblood Skarn shoved him back down. "Don't even think about it," Malachi warned. Orson ignored him, straining to hear the thump of hooves and the metallic creak of the chute gate in the holding pen. Gorefang's muscles rippled under the floodlights, his body shifting with a restless energy that vibrated through the ground. Harlan Buzzard's Fang Vexthorn stood at the gate, one hand resting on the latch. He watched Ezekiel climb the rails, settling into position on the bull's broad back with the ease of a man who had done this 1,000 times, but never on a beast like this. "You ready for this?" Harlan asked. Ezekiel smirked. "Born." "Ready." Jareth Bonehowl Crowbane had moved to the edge of the arena. His stomach nodded. He'd seen plenty of close calls, but this felt different, like standing too close to a fuse already burning. Temperance, Vulture Eye, Draenen sat rigid in the stands, her hands gripping the railing. She didn't care about Ezekiel. but she knew Orson would carry the weight of whatever happened out there. And deep down, she feared Gorefang wasn't. Done with her husband's story, the gate swung open. Gorefang exploded forward in a blur of power, his hind legs launching into the air with bone-jarring force. Ezekiel's body whipped back, then snapped forward, his grip white-knuckled on the rope. The crowd's cheers turned into gasps as the bull twisted violently mid-air, landing hard and bucking again. Dirt flew, the sound of hooves pounding like a drumbeat of war. But there was something strange in the way Gorefang moved, wild. Yes, but measured, as if every motion was deliberate. From the medic's tent doorway, Orson watched, his chest tight. He could see it in the bull's posture, the way his head angled toward the stands where Orson sat. Gorefang wasn't fighting Ezekiel. He was performing for someone else. The realization sent a chill crawling up Orson's spine. Malachi cursed under his breath beside him, sensing the same odd rhythm. Then it happened. Mid-buck, Gorefang planted his front legs hard, twisting so violently that Ezekiel was launched high into the air. The crowd screamed as he hit the dirt with a sickening thud, his body motionless. But the bull didn't charge. He turned his head and stared directly at Orson. The crowd's roar fractured into panicked shouts as Ezekiel Mornick lay sprawled in the dirt, unmoving. Harlan Buzzard's Fang, Bexthorn, and 2 other rodeo clowns rushed in, their bright vests flashing under the harsh lights. Gorefang Hollowspawn didn't flinch. He stood over the fallen rider for a heartbeat, then stepped away, not toward the exit, but toward the edge of the arena, where Orson Ratskull Blightmoor sat in the medic's tent doorway. Every step was deliberate, each hoof sinking deep into the churned earth. Malachi Dirtblood Scarn planted himself in front of Orson's cot, hand out as if he could somehow hold back 1,000 pounds of muscle and rage. "Stay put," Malachi hissed. Orson's heart hammered so hard it felt like it might tear through his ribs. He couldn't look away from those black eyes, locked on him with the same unnerving stillness he'd felt earlier that night. Gorefang was ignoring the chaos behind him, ignoring the medics who now swarmed over Ezekiel. From the stands, Temperance, Vulture Eye, Dramon's voice broke through the noise. "Orson, get back." Her fear cut sharp through the air. But Orson barely heard her. Jareth Bonehowl Crowbane was at the fence now, waving his arms, trying to draw the bull's attention. It didn't work. Gorefang's focus was unshakable. The crowd had gone quiet again, sensing something strange and dangerous unfolding. Ophelia Widowbrand Cray had her camera raised, snapping frame after frame. Through her lens, she caught the moment Gorefang reached the fence, stopping just short of the rails. The massive animal lowered his head, his breath steaming in the cool night air, eyes fixed on Orson as if he were the only man in the world. For an instant, it felt less like predator and prey, and more like recognition, something ancient and unspoken passing between them. Then, without warning, Gorefang let out a deep, guttural bellow that shook the boards underfoot. He turned sharply, kicking up dirt, and charged across the arena toward the open gate. The crowd erupted in relieved cheers, though many still stared in disbelief at what they'd just witnessed. No one could explain why the bull had spared 2 men in one night. No one except maybe Orson? As medics carried Ezekiel toward the exit, Orson remained in the tent doorway, his pulse still racing. He didn't know if Gorefang's actions were a warning, a challenge, or something far more complicated. But he knew this much. The animal had chosen him twice now. And in the world of rodeo, choices like that never came without a price. The rodeo grounds had emptied out to a slow murmur, the electric buzz of the crowd replaced by the low rumble of idling trucks and the shuffle of boots on gravel. In the medic's trailer, Ezekiel Mornick lay on a stretcher, pale but breathing. Malachi Dirtblood Scarn was bent over him, checking for fractures. "He's lucky," Malachi muttered. "Could have been a crushed skull. Concussion's bad enough." Lucky wasn't the word Orson Ratskull Blightmoor would have chosen. Temperance vulture-eyed Draymond lingered in the corner, arms folded tightly. She hadn't spoken to Orson since the moment Gorefang Hollowspawn had walked away from him. Now she broke the silence. "This isn't a coincidence. Twice in one night? That bull's got your name burned into his mind." Orson stared at the floor, replaying the moment Gorefang's eyes met his. He didn't argue, because part of him believed it. Jareth Bonehowl Crowbane stepped inside, closing the door behind him to muffle the outside noise. "There's talk already," he said quietly. "Some folks are saying you've got some kind of pull over Gorefang. Others think you trained him to act like that. Either way, they're looking at you different." Orson's head came up sharply. "I've never touched that bull outside the arena," he said, his voice flat but edged with something dangerous. Across the grounds, in the dim light near the stock pens, Harlan Buzzard's Fang, Vexthorn, stood with Ophelia Widowbrand. Pray. She had her notepad open, scribbling furiously. "You've been around long enough," she pressed. "You ever seen Gorefang behave like that before?" Harlan shook his head slowly. "No, and I've been in this game 30 years. That bull doesn't show mercy, not to anyone." He paused, then added, "Unless he remembers something." Ophelia's pen froze mid-word. "Remembers?" But Harlan had already turned away, walking into the shadows. Later that night, Orson found himself alone, leaning against the side of his truck. The pain in his leg throbbed, but it was the ache in his chest that weighed heavier. He could still see Gorefang's eyes, not wild or frenzied, but steady, deliberate, as if the animal had been studying him, not just reacting. That thought settled deep into his gut, stirring a discomfort he couldn't shake Dot from somewhere beyond the parking lot. The deep, resonant sound of a bull's bellow rolled through the dark. It wasn't aggressive. It was something else entirely. Orson turned toward the sound, a shiver crawling along his spine. Gorefang Hollowspawn was still out there. And if Harlan was right, the bull wasn't just remembering. He was waiting. The next morning, a pale dawn spread over the rodeo grounds, casting long shadows across the empty arena. Orson Ratskull Blightmoor sat on the tailgate of his truck, sipping bitter coffee from a dented thermos. His leg was wrapped tight, the pain dulled by pills, but never gone. He'd been awake most of the night, the echo of Gorefang Hollowspawn's bellows still fresh in his mind. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw those unblinking black eyes staring into him. Jareth Bonehowl Crowbane arrived with dust still clinging to his boots, carrying a manila envelope. "You need to see this," he said, handing it over. Inside were photocopies of old rodeo records, some dating back more than a decade. One page stopped Orson cold, a grainy photograph of a younger man riding a bull that looked eerily like Gorefang, only smaller, leaner. Scrawled across the bottom was a name Orson hadn't heard in years: Clay Blightmoor. His father. "That's not possible," Orson muttered, flipping the page over. But the evidence was there in black and white. Temperance, vulture eye. Draymond had joined them silently, her hand resting on Orson's shoulder. "Your father rode him?" she asked softly. Jareth shook his head. "Not him, his sire. Name was Gorefang Hollowspawn. Meanest bull of his time. And word is, Gorefang's got his memory." Meanwhile, in the far corner of the grounds, Harlan Buzzard's Fang Vexthorn stood by the stock pen, watching Gorefang pace. The bull's movements were tight, almost restless, his gaze flicking toward anyone who approached. Ophelia Widowbrand Cray appeared beside Harlan, notebook in hand. "You think he remembers people?" she asked. Harlan didn't answer right away. "I think animals remember things that matter to them," he finally said. And if your dad ever went head-to-head with his bloodline, Gorefang might see you as part of that story. Ezekiel Gravea, Mornick, bandaged and bitter, limped toward them on crutches. That bull didn't spare me, he spat. He was saving it for you. His glare was sharp as broken glass, and for a moment, Orson felt the weight of something more dangerous than the bull. The envy and malice in Ezekiel's eyes dot as the sun climbed higher. The loudspeakers crackled with the announcement of the evening's lineup. Gorefang Hollowspawn's name was on it, paired with a rider who had yet to be chosen. Orson closed the envelope, his jaw set. The truth about Gorefang's bloodline didn't just explain last night. It made the next ride inevitable. And deep down, he knew exactly who the bull would be waiting for when the gate swung open. The afternoon heat shimmered over the dusty rodeo grounds, turning the metal rails of the arena into warm steel. Orson Ratskull Blightmoor sat in the shade of his truck, staring at the folded manila envelope in his hands. He'd read the pages at least a dozen times, tracing the grainy photograph of his father on Gorefang Hollowspawn. The connection between man and beast bloodline felt heavier now, almost like fate breathing down his neck. Jareth Bonehowl Crowbane crouched beside him. "You don't have to do this," he said, his voice steady but urgent. "That leg isn't healed, and Gorefang isn't like any bull out there. Whatever's going on in his head, it's not about rodeo points anymore." Orson didn't look up. "I know," he replied. "That's why it has to be me." Across the grounds, Ezekiel Gravea Mornick leaned against the medic's trailer, still on crutches, watching with narrowed eyes. He'd already spoken to the event organizer, slipping his own suggestion into the lineup changes. If Orson didn't volunteer, Ezekiel would make sure the decision was made for him. He wanted to see Orson in that arena again, and maybe, just maybe, watch the bull finish what he'd started. Temperance vulture-eyed Draymond found Orson before the evening show. "You've got nothing to prove," she said, stepping into his line of sight. "Not to them, not to me, not to anyone." Her voice was low, but the fear behind it was sharp. Orson reached for her hand. "This isn't about proving something. It's about ending something." She shook her head, but her grip tightened, as if part of her already knew she couldn't stop him. Harlan Buzzard's Fang Vexthorn was at the chute gate when Gorefang Hollowspawn was brought in. The bull's black coat gleamed under the lights, his muscles rippling with contained energy. Harlan leaned in close, speaking just loud enough for the animal to hear. "He's coming for you, isn't he?" Gorefang's head twitched toward the sound, his nostrils flaring. It wasn't an answer, but it was all the confirmation Harlan needed. As the sun dipped and the crowd began to fill the stands, the announcer's voice rolled over the arena. "And tonight, for the final ride, Orson Ratskull Blightmoor versus Gorefang Hollowspawn." A wave of noise erupted from the audience. Orson rose slowly from the bench, his leg throbbing, but his resolve solid as iron. Somewhere beyond the gate, Gorefang waited, silent and still. The final meeting between man and beast was no longer a possibility. It was a certainty. The arena was a sea of light and noise as Orson Ratskull Blightmoor stepped up to the chute. Every sound, the clang of metal gates, the muffled roar of the crowd, the pounding of hooves, seemed sharper, clearer. Gorefang Hollowspawn stood in the narrow space, his massive frame tense but unmoving. His head turned slightly, one black eye locking onto Orson. It was the same unblinking stare as before, but tonight there was no mistaking it. The bull was waiting for him. Jareth Bonehowl Crowbane adjusted the rope, his hands quick and precise. "You've got 8 seconds to survive," he said, his voice low. Orson shook his head. "No," he replied. "I've got 8 seconds to finish this." Temperance vulture eye. Draymond watched from the rails, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might drown out the crowd. She whispered something to herself, but the noise swallowed her words. The gate swung open, and Gorefang erupted from the chute in an explosion of muscle and dirt. The first buck nearly launched Orson. Clear, but his grip held. The bull twisted mid-air, then pounded down hard, the vibrations shooting up through Orson's injured leg. Pain flared white-hot, but he stayed centered, every movement a battle against the raw power beneath him. The crowd cheers rose, a wave of sound carrying him forward. Halfway through the ride, Gorefang slowed, not much, but enough for Orson to feel it. The bull's head angled, and for a brief heartbeat, their eyes met again. In that instant, Orson understood. This wasn't a fight anymore. It was a reckoning, a final test of will. Gorefang surged forward, bucking harder, as if demanding Orson meet him at full strength. And Orson did. When the final horn blared, Orson leapt clear, landing hard in the dirt but rolling to his feet. Gorefang skidded to a stop, turning to face him. For a long moment, man and beast simply stared at each other, the noise of the arena fading to nothing. Then Gorefang lowered his head, not in defeat but in acknowledgement, before trotting toward the open gate. The crowd erupted, but Orson barely heard it. Something unspoken had passed between them, and he knew it was over. Temperance rushed to his side, wrapping her arms around him. Jareth clapped him on the shoulder, grinning wide. 8 seconds, he said. Orson looked back toward the gate where Gorefang had vanished. 8 seconds, he agreed, and a lifetime in between. Under the lights, with the dust still hanging in the air, Orson finally felt the weight lift. Whatever bound him to Gorefang Hollowspawn had ended tonight, not in victory, not in defeat, but in understanding.